They told me I won $22.8 million. I sobbed not because of joy, but because the man I trusted most immediately told me I didn't deserve it, and accused me of cheating to steal my fortune. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. My name is Margaret, and at 72 years old, I thought I knew everything about betrayal. I was wrong. The lottery ticket sat crumpled in my trembling hands that Tuesday morning in my cramped Brooklyn apartment. The numbers matched. All of them. $22.8 million. But instead of champagne and celebration, I got accusations and threats from the man who'd slept beside me for 47 years. The morning had started like every other for the past 5 years since I'd retired from nursing. The radiator clanged its familiar tune, fighting against the November chill creeping through windows that hadn't been properly sealed since the Clinton administration. Coffee grounds spilled across my counter as arthritic fingers struggled with the plastic lid. Outside, delivery trucks rumbled past our fourth-floor walk-up, their engines mixing with the distant hum of traffic crossing the Manhattan Bridge. I remember the smell that morning. Old wood polish from furniture we'd bought in our 30s, the faint scent of my neighbor Mrs. Chen's cooking drifting through thin walls, and something else, the metallic taste of fear that I'd grown accustomed to whenever Harold's voice carried that particular edge. He was sitting at our kitchen table, reading yesterday's newspaper for the third time, when I checked the lottery numbers on my phone. The device felt heavy in my hands, its cracked screen reflecting my weathered face. 65, 67, 12, 34, 41. The Powerball, 19. My heart stopped. Then it hammered so hard I thought it might burst through my chest. I checked again. And again. The numbers stared back at me, unblinking, undeniable. "Harold," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the morning traffic. "Harold, I think I won." He looked up from his paper, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose the way they'd been for decades. Gray stubble covered his jaw. His eyes, once bright blue, had faded to the color of winter skies. "Won what?" His tone was flat, disinterested. "The lottery. I won the lottery, Harold. $22.8 million. The newspaper crumpled in his hands. For a moment, complete silence filled our tiny kitchen. Even the radiator seemed to hold its breath. Then Harold laughed. Not the warm laugh I'd fallen in love with in 1975, but something cold and sharp that cut through the air like broken glass. You won $22 million? He stood up, his 6-foot frame casting a shadow across our breakfast table. "Margaret, sweetheart, you can barely remember to pay the electric bill on time." The words hit like a slap. My mouth opened, closed, opened again. No sound came out. "Let me see that ticket." He reached for my hands, but I pulled them back instinctively. "Harold, it's real. I checked 3 times. The numbers don't mean anything if you can't prove you bought that ticket legitimately." His voice dropped to a whisper, but there was venom in it. "For all I know, you've been having an affair with that convenience store clerk on Atlantic Avenue. Maybe he's been giving you inside information." The room tilted. I gripped the edge of our Formica countertop, the same one we'd installed when our youngest, David, started high school. Are you accusing me of cheating?" "I'm not accusing you of anything, Margaret. I'm stating facts. 72-year-old women don't just win the lottery unless something fishy is going on." My knees felt weak. I lowered myself into the chair across from him, the same chair where I'd fed our 3 children breakfast for 20 years, where I'd paid bills until my eyes burned, where I'd sat alone so many nights waiting for him to come home from the bar. "Harold, I bought that ticket at Chen's Market on Tuesday, same as I do every week. Same numbers I've played since 1987. You know this." He was pacing now, his slippers shuffling against the linoleum. "What I know is that sudden windfalls don't just happen to people like us. What I know is that this money, if it's real, represents assets that were acquired during our marriage. Which makes it community property." The legal words fell between us like stones. In 47 years of marriage, Harold had never spoken to me about community property or assets. He'd left all the financial decisions to me while he bounced from job to job, dream to dream, bar to bar. "I need to call the lottery office," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "We need to call our lawyer first." Harold's correction was swift and sharp. "Our lawyer?" "Margaret, listen to me very carefully. That money represents our future. Our retirement. Our children's inheritance. But first, we need to make sure everything is legitimate. We need to make sure you haven't done anything questionable to obtain that ticket." The kitchen suddenly felt too small. I stood on unsteady legs and walked to our living room, where 40 years of family photos watched from every surface. Harold followed, his presence heavy behind me. I stopped in front of our wedding picture. 1976, I was 25, wearing my mother's altered dress, Harold in a rented tuxedo that was too big in the shoulders. We looked so young. So hopeful. So completely unprepared for what was coming. I haven't done anything questionable, I said to our younger selves in the photograph. Then you won't mind if we investigate this properly. Through legal channels. I turned to face him. Legal channels? I've already made some calls while you were processing this news. There are procedures for lottery winnings of this magnitude. Especially when there might be questions about the legitimacy of the ticket purchase. My blood turned to ice water. You made calls? Harold, I just told you 5 minutes ago. Margaret, when you've been married as long as we have, you learn to think quickly. This money could change everything for us. But only if we handle it correctly. The way he said us made my stomach turn. Not the comfortable us of shared grocery lists and inside jokes. The calculating us of business partnerships and legal documents. I sank onto our couch, the same brown sofa we'd bought on layaway in 1983. The springs had given out years ago, and sitting there felt like sinking into quicksand. Outside our window, Brooklyn continued its relentless pace. Horns honked. People shouted in languages I couldn't identify. Life moved forward while mine seemed to stop completely. I need some air, I said. Where are you going? The suspicion in his voice made me look up. Harold stood between me and the door, his arms crossed over his chest. Just for a walk. To think. I don't think that's a good idea right now. Not until we sort this out. Sort what out, Harold? I won the lottery. That's not something that needs sorting. Everything needs sorting when there's this much money involved, Margaret. Everything. I stayed on the couch for the next 6 hours. Harold made phone calls in the bedroom with the door closed. I could hear his voice rising and falling, urgent whispers punctuated by long silences. Around 3 o'clock, he emerged with a yellow legal pad covered in his handwriting. I've been in touch with Peterson and Associates, he said, settling into his recliner. They specialize in high-asset divorces. The word divorce hung in the air like smoke from a fire I couldn't see. Divorce? Precautionary measures, Margaret. When there are significant assets involved, it's important to protect everyone's interests. Everyone's interests? Yours, mine, the children's. This money represents a fundamental change in our financial situation. We need to make sure it's distributed fairly. I stared at him. This man who'd forgotten my birthday 3 years running. Who'd spent our anniversary last month at Murphy's Tavern with his construction buddies. Who'd told me just last week that my cooking had gotten worse since I retired. This man was talking about protecting my interests. I think I need to call Jennifer, I said. Our oldest daughter lived in New Jersey with her husband and 2 teenage boys. I've already spoken with Jennifer. And Michael and David. My heart stopped. You called our children? They have a right to know about this windfall. And about the complications surrounding it. What complications, Harold? He consulted his legal pad. Questions about the acquisition of the winning ticket. Potential fraud investigations. The need for forensic accounting of our joint assets. Each word felt like a physical blow. I pressed my hands against my chest, trying to calm my racing heart. Harold, I bought a $2 lottery ticket at the corner store where I've been shopping for 15 years. Mrs. Chen knows me. Her son Kevin knows me. There's no fraud. That's what we need to establish. Through proper channels. The rest of that day passed in a blur of legal terminology and whispered phone calls. Harold spoke with lawyers, accountants, and what he called asset protection specialists. I sat on our couch, still in my bathrobe, watching the numbers on that lottery ticket until they blurred. By evening, our apartment felt like a crime scene. Harold had gathered bank statements, tax returns, mortgage documents, and every piece of financial paperwork we'd accumulated over nearly 5 decades of marriage. We need to establish a timeline, he said over a dinner of microwaved leftovers. When exactly did you start playing these particular numbers? Is there any documentation of your ticket purchases? Any witnesses to your routine? I pushed food around my plate. My routine? Your gambling routine, Margaret. Because that's what this is. Gambling. And now that you've won, we need to prove that everything was above board. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling while Harold snored beside me. The ticket, that little piece of paper worth more money than I could properly comprehend, sat folded in my jewelry box. I'd thought about putting it in our safety deposit box, but Harold had suggested that might look like I was hiding something. Hiding something. After 47 years of marriage, the man sleeping 2 feet away from me thought I was capable of hiding something worth $22 million. The next morning brought reporters. Somehow, word had leaked about our lottery win. 3 news vans parked outside our building, their satellite dishes reaching toward the cloudy November sky like mechanical flowers seeking sunlight. Harold was in his element. He'd put on his best shirt, the blue one I'd given him for Christmas 2 years ago, and styled his hair with the pomade he usually saved for weddings and funerals. "We're not ready to make any statements," he told the cameras clustered around our building's entrance. "This is a complex situation that requires careful legal review." Complex situation. I watched from our fourth-story window as my husband transformed our good fortune into something sinister and complicated. The reporters scribbled in notebooks and adjusted their microphones, eating up every word. When he came back upstairs, Harold was energized in a way I hadn't seen in years. "Channel 7 wants an exclusive interview," he said, loosening his tie. "Once we get the legal framework established." "Legal framework for what?" "For managing our assets, Margaret. $22 million doesn't just get deposited into our checking account at Brooklyn Savings. There are tax implications, investment strategies, estate planning considerations." I nodded along, but something cold was spreading through my chest. Harold kept saying "our assets," but his eyes never quite met mine when he said it. That afternoon, Jennifer called. "Mom, Dad explained the situation," she said without preamble. "I think you need representation." "Representation?" "Legal representation, Mom. Independent from Dad." I was standing in our kitchen, looking out at Mrs. Chen's laundromat across the street. Through the window, I could see her folding clothes with the same methodical precision she'd used for the 20 years I'd known her. "Why would I need representation independent from your father?" Jennifer's sigh carried clearly through the phone. "Mom, what Dad's suggesting, it sounds like he's treating this like you've done something wrong. He just wants to make sure everything is handled properly. By questioning whether you legitimately won the money? He's being cautious. He's being paranoid. And controlling. Mom, this is your lottery ticket. You bought it with your money. You chose the numbers. You won." I sank into my kitchen chair. Outside, a delivery truck double-parked while the driver hauled boxes into Chen's Market. Normal life, continuing as if my world hadn't turned upside down. "Your father is worried about fraud accusations," I said. "Fraud accusations from whom?" "You bought a lottery ticket and won." "That's not fraud, that's luck." I wanted to agree with her, but Harold's words from the morning echoed in my head. 72-year-old women don't just win the lottery unless something fishy is going on. "I should probably go," I said. "Your father wants to review some documents." "Mom." Jennifer's voice was sharp. "Be careful." After I hung up, I sat in the growing afternoon shadows of our kitchen. The apartment was quiet except for the distant sounds of Brooklyn, car horns, sirens, the elevated subway rumbling past 6 blocks away. For the first time since yesterday morning, I was alone with my thoughts. I thought about the lottery ticket, still folded in my jewelry box. I thought about the numbers I'd played faithfully for 36 years, Harold's birthday, my birthday, our wedding anniversary, our children's birth years, and 19 for the house number where I grew up in Queens. I thought about the $2 I'd spent every Tuesday at Chen's Market. $2 from my small weekly allowance that I'd saved by buying generic cereal and skipping my monthly manicure. I thought about Harold's questions. His suggestions that somehow I'd cheated or lied or engaged in fraud to win money that was rightfully mine. And I thought about something else. Something that had been nagging at the edges of my consciousness since yesterday morning. Harold hadn't congratulated me. Not once. He hadn't hugged me or kissed me or expressed any joy at our sudden good fortune. His first instinct had been suspicion. His second had been to call lawyers. I was still sitting in the kitchen when Harold returned home at 5:30. He'd been out all day, meeting with what he called the team, lawyers and accountants and financial advisors who were apparently necessary to manage our new wealth. "How was your day?" he asked, setting his briefcase on the counter. "Quiet." "Good. We need to talk." He sat across from me at our small table, his expression serious. "I've been doing research, Margaret. About lottery fraud. About the red flags that investigators look for." My stomach clenched. Red flags? Patterns that suggest insider knowledge or conspiracy. "And I have to tell you, some aspects of your win are concerning." "What aspects?" Harold pulled out his yellow legal pad, now covered with several pages of notes. "First, the frequency of your play. Every week for 36 years. That's an unusual level of dedication for someone who claims to have no inside information. I played the same numbers because they meant something to me. Second, the location where you purchased the ticket. Chen's Market has been cited twice by the state for lottery irregularities." "What kind of irregularities?" "Discrepancies in their ticket inventory. Missing documentation for high-value ticket sales." I felt like I was sinking. "Harold, Mrs. Chen has run that store for 20 years. She's never done anything dishonest. That you know of. But Margaret, think about it from an investigator's perspective. An elderly woman wins a major jackpot using numbers she's played for decades, always purchasing her tickets from the same store that has a history of inventory problems. At minimum, it raises questions." "Questions about what?" About whether you had advanced knowledge of the winning numbers. About whether someone at that store provided you with information or assistance not available to other players. The room spun. I gripped the edge of the table. Harold, are you seriously suggesting that I cheated to win the lottery? I'm suggesting that from the outside, it could appear that way. Which is why we need to be proactive about protecting ourselves. Protecting ourselves from what? From criminal investigation. From civil lawsuits. From having our winnings frozen or confiscated while the state conducts its review. I stared at him. This man I'd loved for almost 50 years was sitting across from me, explaining why my good fortune looked suspicious. What are you proposing? I asked quietly. Harold consulted his notes. Peterson suggests we establish a family trust immediately. All assets, including the lottery winnings, would be held in trust, with professional management and oversight. Meaning what, exactly? Meaning the money would be protected from any potential legal challenges. It would be managed by qualified professionals rather than. He gestured vaguely in my direction. Rather than me? Margaret, be reasonable. You've never managed assets of this magnitude. None of us have. This requires expertise. I looked around our kitchen. The chipped countertops I'd scrubbed for decades. The ancient refrigerator held together with duct tape and prayer. The table where we'd eaten thousands of meals together. Who would control this trust? I asked. Initially, both of us. But given the questions surrounding the ticket's acquisition, Peterson thinks it would be best if I served as the primary trustee. There it was. The thing I'd been sensing but hadn't wanted to acknowledge. Harold didn't just suspect me of fraud. He wanted to control my winnings. I need some time to think about this, I said. Time is the one thing we don't have, Margaret. Peterson says the state could freeze our assets any day now if they decide to investigate. We need to move quickly. That night, I couldn't sleep. I got up around 2 a.m. and made tea, sitting by our living room window watching the empty street below. Occasionally, a taxi would cruise past, its headlights cutting through the darkness like searching eyes. I thought about my life before yesterday morning. Modest but comfortable. Predictable but peaceful. Harold and I hadn't been especially happy in recent years, but we'd settled into a rhythm that worked for both of us. Now everything felt unstable and threatening. I thought about the trust Harold wanted me to sign. About professional managers controlling money that I'd won. About having to justify every expenditure to people I'd never met. I thought about Harold's reaction to my win. His immediate suspicion. His suggestions of fraud and conspiracy. And I thought about something that hadn't occurred to me until that moment, sitting alone in the dark. Harold seemed more concerned about losing the money than he was excited about having it. The next few days passed in a blur of meetings and legal documents. Harold had assembled what he called the team, 3 lawyers, 2 accountants, and a financial advisor who specialized in high-net-worth asset protection. I sat through hours of presentations about tax implications and estate planning and fraud prevention. Legal terminology washed over me like a foreign language. Everyone spoke to Harold as if I weren't in the room. Your wife's lottery win presents some unique challenges, Peterson explained during one particularly lengthy meeting. The circumstances surrounding the ticket purchase, combined with the magnitude of the prize, create potential vulnerabilities. What kind of vulnerabilities? I asked. Peterson barely glanced in my direction. Criminal exposure, civil liability, asset forfeiture. The state takes lottery fraud very seriously. But I didn't commit fraud. Of course not, Peterson said smoothly. But appearances matter. Perception matters. And the perception of a long-term relationship with a retailer who has a questionable history could be problematic. I wanted to defend Mrs. Chen, but Harold squeezed my hand under the table, a warning to stay quiet. After the meeting, as we rode the elevator down from Peterson's Manhattan office, Harold seemed pleased. I think that went well, he said. Peterson really understands our situation. Our situation? The complexities we're facing. The need to protect ourselves. I watched the floor numbers count down. Harold, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you believe I won this money legitimately? He was quiet for so long that the elevator reached the lobby before he answered. Margaret, what I believe doesn't matter. What matters is what we can prove. We rode the subway back to Brooklyn in silence. I stared at my reflection in the dark windows as Queens passed by outside. The woman looking back at me seemed older than I remembered, more tired, more unsure. That evening, while Harold was at Murphy's Tavern with his construction friends, I called Jennifer again. Mom, how are you holding up? She asked. I'm not sure. Everything feels so complicated now. It doesn't have to be. You won the lottery. Claim the prize. Pay the taxes. Enjoy the rest. Your father thinks it's not that simple. Jennifer was quiet for a moment. Mom, can I ask you something personal? Of course. In the past few years, has Dad been different? More controlling than usual? I considered the question. He's always been protective. That's not what I mean. Tyler and Jake noticed it last Christmas. The way Dad talked to you. The way he dismissed things you said. Tyler and Jake were Jennifer's sons, my grandsons. Both teenagers now, but still young enough to see clearly. What exactly did they notice? The way he corrected you. Interrupted you. Made decisions for you without asking what you wanted. I was quiet, thinking about the past year. Harold's increasing frustration with what he called my senior moments, times when I forgot things or got confused about dates or names. His habit of answering questions directed at me. His insistence on handling all our finances because I was getting scattered. Mom? Are you still there? I'm here. Jennifer, what do you think I should do? I think you should hire your own lawyer. Someone who represents your interests, not Dad's interests. That seems so adversarial. Mom, $22 million is adversarial money. It changes people. It makes them do things they wouldn't normally do. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet apartment thinking about Jennifer's words. It changes people. Had the money changed Harold? Or had it simply revealed something that was already there? I thought about our early years of marriage. Harold had always been ambitious, but his dreams never quite materialized. The construction company that failed in 1982. The restaurant franchise that went bankrupt in 1987. The get-rich-quick schemes that cost us our savings in 1993. Each failure had made him a little more bitter, a little more suspicious of good fortune. Maybe my lottery win wasn't changing Harold. Maybe it was just triggering 40 years of accumulated disappointment. Or maybe Jennifer was right. Maybe the money was revealing who Harold really was. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I left the apartment without telling Harold where I was going. I took the subway into Manhattan and found the offices of Sullivan and Associates, a law firm that Jennifer had recommended. The receptionist was a young woman with kind eyes who offered me coffee and didn't seem to judge my worn coat or nervous hands. Patricia Sullivan was about my age, with gray hair and a direct manner that reminded me of my best nursing supervisor. Mrs. Henderson, she said after I explained my situation, let me ask you a very simple question. Do you want to claim your lottery prize? Of course I do. Then let's claim it. Today. It was that simple. Patricia made a phone call to the state lottery office, scheduled an appointment for the following morning, and explained the straightforward process of claiming winnings. Your husband's concerns about fraud investigation are unfounded, she said. Lottery officials conduct routine verification for all major prizes. They'll confirm that you purchased the ticket legitimately, that the numbers are valid, and that you're entitled to the prize. It's standard procedure, not a criminal investigation. But what about the trust? The asset protection? Patricia smiled. Mrs. Henderson, you can certainly establish a trust if you want to. But you don't have to. And you certainly don't have to do it immediately, before you've even claimed your prize. My husband says we need to move quickly to protect ourselves. Protect yourselves from what? I couldn't answer that question. I'd been asking myself the same thing for days. Mrs. Henderson, may I speak frankly? I nodded. In my experience, people who win the lottery face two main threats to their winnings. The first is their own poor financial decisions. The second is family members who want to control their money. The words hit like cold water. Your husband may have legitimate concerns about managing this windfall responsibly, Patricia continued. But his approach, questioning the validity of your win, suggesting possible fraud, insisting on immediate trust establishment with him as primary trustee, those are not the actions of someone protecting your interests. I stared at my hands, folded in my lap. My wedding ring felt heavier than usual. What do you think I should do? I think you should claim your prize. Put the money in an account under your name. Take some time to consider your options without pressure from anyone else. And if Harold objects? Harold doesn't get to object to how you handle money that you won. That afternoon, I returned to Brooklyn with papers in my purse that would allow me to claim my prize independently. I also had Patricia Sullivan's business card and a plan to meet her the next morning at the lottery office. Harold was waiting when I got home. Where were you? He asked before I'd even closed the door. I had some errands to run. What kind of errands? I hung up my coat, buying time. In 47 years of marriage, I'd never lied to Harold about where I'd been. But I'd also never won $22 million. I went to see a lawyer, I said. Harold's face went very still. Which lawyer? A different lawyer. Someone to represent my interests. Your interests are my interests, Margaret. We're married. Patricia Sullivan doesn't seem to think it's that simple. Patricia Sullivan? My lawyer. The words felt strange in my mouth. My lawyer. Not our lawyer or Harold's lawyer. Mine. Harold sat down heavily in his recliner. Margaret, what are you doing? I'm claiming my lottery prize tomorrow morning. Without the trust? The trust can wait. I want to understand my options before I make any permanent decisions. Harold was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was different. Colder. I think you're making a mistake. It's my mistake to make. Not if your mistakes affect our family. Not if your mistakes affect me. I looked at him sitting in his chair, still wearing the good shirt he'd put on for the reporters 3 days ago. Still playing the role of the responsible husband managing his wife's windfall. Harold, can I ask you something? What? Are you happy that I won? He looked up sharply. What kind of question is that? It's a simple question. Are you happy that I won $22 million? Of course I'm happy. You haven't acted happy. I've acted responsible. Someone has to think about the consequences. The consequences of winning the lottery? The consequences of handling it wrong. I sat down on the couch across from him. What would handling it right look like? Harold consulted his yellow legal pad, now filled with several pages of notes and legal terminology. Professional management of all assets, he said. Tax-advantaged trusts. Conservative investment strategies. Protection from potential litigation. What about enjoying it? He looked puzzled. Enjoying what? The money. The freedom. The opportunities. Margaret, this isn't play money. This is serious wealth. It requires serious management. But it's my wealth, Harold. I won it. Something flickered across his face. Irritation, maybe, or impatience. Community property laws in New York are very clear, Margaret. Assets acquired during marriage belong to both spouses. There it was again. Legal language where there should have been celebration. Rules and regulations where there should have been dreams and possibilities. I'm claiming the prize tomorrow, I said again. With or without me? That's up to you. Harold was quiet for several minutes, staring at his legal pad. Finally, he looked up. If you're determined to do this recklessly, I can't stop you. But I want it on record that I advised against it. Noted. That night, we ate dinner in silence. Harold made more phone calls behind the closed bedroom door while I sat by the living room window, watching the evening traffic on Atlantic Avenue. I thought about Patricia Sullivan's question. Do you want to claim your lottery prize? It should have been the easiest question in the world to answer. But somehow, in the past 5 days, it had become complicated and fraught with legal implications and family tensions. I went to bed early, but I couldn't sleep. Harold came to bed around 11, but we didn't speak. We lay in the dark, two people who'd shared a bed for 47 years, not touching. Around midnight, Harold spoke into the darkness. Margaret? Yes? I hope you know what you're doing. His voice carried something I couldn't identify. Warning, maybe. Or threat. I hope so too, I said. The lottery office was located in a nondescript building in Lower Manhattan, surrounded by traffic and construction noise. Patricia Sullivan met me outside at 9 a.m. sharp, carrying a briefcase and wearing the kind of confident expression I wished I felt. Ready? She asked. I clutched my purse, where the winning ticket sat in a small envelope between my credit cards and Medicare information. Ready? The process was remarkably simple. A lottery official verified the ticket's authenticity using a scanner that beeped twice and displayed a green checkmark. He checked my identification, had me sign several forms, and explained my options for receiving the prize. You can take the lump sum of approximately $13.7 million after taxes, he explained, or annual payments of approximately $430,000 for 30 years. Lump sum, I said without hesitation. Patricia had advised me to take the lump sum for precisely this reason. It would give me complete control over the money immediately, rather than creating an ongoing stream of payments that could potentially be complicated by future legal disputes. The official processed more paperwork, took my photograph, and handed me a receipt confirming that I would receive the full amount within 10 business days. Congratulations, Mrs. Henderson, he said. Enjoy your retirement. Outside the building, Patricia and I stood on the sidewalk in the November sunshine. How do you feel? She asked. Terrified, I said honestly. That's normal. $13.7 million is life-changing money. But it's your money, Mrs. Henderson. You get to decide how it changes your life. I took the subway home alone. Patricia had offered to come with me to help explain the situation to Harold, but I declined. This was something I needed to do myself. Harold was waiting in the living room when I walked in. He dressed carefully again, slacks instead of jeans, a button-down shirt instead of his usual t-shirt. As if he were preparing for an important meeting. Well, he said. It's done. The money will be deposited in 10 days. Into which account? An account at Chase Manhattan. Under my name. Harold's jaw tightened. Just your name? Just my name. Margaret, we need to discuss this. We can discuss it. But the decision is made. Harold stood up and began pacing, his hands clasped behind his back. This is exactly what Peterson warned us about. Rash decisions made without proper consideration. There was nothing rash about it. I spent 5 days considering it. 5 days isn't enough time to evaluate a decision of this magnitude. How much time would be enough, Harold? He stopped pacing and looked at me directly. Long enough to establish proper legal protections. Long enough to ensure that this windfall doesn't destroy our family. How would money destroy our family? By creating jealousy, resentment, legal challenges from children who feel they're not getting their fair share. I sat down on the couch, feeling suddenly exhausted. Our children don't even know the details yet. They'll know soon enough. And when they do, they'll have questions. About how the money is being managed. About what their inheritance will be. About whether their mother is competent to handle this kind of wealth. The last sentence felt like a physical blow. Are you saying I'm not competent, Harold? I'm saying that people will question your competence. Especially given some of the memory issues you've been having lately. I stared at him. What memory issues? Margaret, be honest. You've been forgetting things more frequently over the past year. Names, dates, appointments. Last month you left the stove on all night. 2 weeks ago you couldn't remember our grandson's birthday. Each example felt like an accusation. And worse, they were true. I had been more forgetful lately. But nothing serious. Nothing that interfered with my daily life. Everyone forgets things as they get older, I said. Not everyone has $13.7 million to manage. We stared at each other across our small living room. The afternoon light coming through our windows highlighted the dust motes floating between us, tiny particles suspended in space. What exactly are you suggesting, Harold? I'm suggesting that we need to think about this practically. About what's best for you. What's best for our family. And what do you think is best? Harold pulled out his yellow legal pad and sat down across from me. Peterson has drawn up guardianship papers, he said quietly. The room went silent except for the distant sound of traffic and the neighbor's television through the thin walls. Guardianship papers? Legal documents that would protect you from making financial decisions that could be harmful to yourself or your family. You want to have me declared incompetent? I want to protect you, Margaret. From people who might try to take advantage of you. From your own impulses. From decisions you might regret later. I looked around our living room. The furniture we'd chosen together. The photographs of our children and grandchildren. The life we'd built over 47 years. Harold, I said carefully, are you planning to have me declared incompetent so that you can control my lottery winnings? I'm planning to protect your lottery winnings from anyone who might try to exploit you. Including you? His face went very still. That's an insulting question. It's the only question that matters right now. Harold set down his legal pad and leaned forward in his chair. Margaret, I've spent 47 years taking care of you. Providing for you. Protecting you. Why would I stop now? Because now there's $13.7 million involved. The money doesn't change how I feel about you. Doesn't it? We sat in silence for several minutes. Outside, a siren wailed past, probably heading toward Brooklyn Hospital where I'd worked for 30 years. Where I'd made life and death decisions every day. Where no one had ever questioned my competence. I'm not signing any guardianship papers, I said finally. Then we have a problem. What kind of problem? Harold picked up his legal pad and flipped through several pages. Peterson says that if you insist on maintaining sole control of these assets, he can't represent our family anymore. Too much potential liability. So we'll find another lawyer. Margaret, Peterson is the best asset protection attorney in New York. If he won't represent us, who will? I have Patricia Sullivan. Patricia Sullivan represents you. What about me? What about our children? What about our family's long-term financial security? I looked at Harold sitting across from me, consulting his notes about asset protection and legal liability. This man who'd never shown much interest in our finances when we had $37,000 in savings was suddenly deeply concerned about protecting $13.7 million. Harold, can I ask you something honestly? Of course. If I hadn't won this lottery, would you be talking about having me declared incompetent? He was quiet for a long moment. That's a hypothetical question. No, it's not. It's the most important question in this conversation. Harold closed his legal pad and set it on the coffee table between us. Margaret, the lottery changes everything. It changes the stakes. It changes the risks. It changes what we can afford to lose. But it doesn't change who I am, doesn't it? Now it was my turn to be quiet. Did winning the lottery change who I was? Or did it simply reveal who I'd always been, someone capable of making my own decisions, managing my own life, claiming my own victories? I think this conversation is over, I said, standing up. Where are you going? For a walk. To think. Margaret, we need to resolve this. There's nothing to resolve, Harold. I won the lottery. I claimed the prize. The money will be deposited into my account in 10 days. And then what? I stopped at the door and looked back at him. And then I'll decide what to do with my money. Your money? My money. I left Harold sitting in the living room with his legal pad full of notes about asset protection and guardianship papers. I walked down the 4 flights of stairs and out onto Atlantic Avenue, where the November afternoon felt crisp and full of possibilities. For the first time in a week, I felt like I could breathe. I walked east toward Prospect Heights, past the familiar neighborhood where I'd lived for 23 years. Past Chen's Market, where Mrs. Chen waved from behind the counter. Past the elementary school where our youngest, David, had learned to read. Past the park where I'd pushed grandchildren on swings just last summer. Everything looked the same, but everything felt different. I sat on a bench in Prospect Park and thought about Harold's questions. What about our children? What about our family's long-term financial security? They were good questions. Important questions. But they weren't the most important questions. The most important question was this: after 47 years of marriage, did my husband trust me to make decisions about my own life? And the answer, clearly, was no. I pulled out my phone and called Patricia Sullivan. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Harold wants me to sign guardianship papers giving him control of the money." Patricia was quiet for a moment. "Mrs. Henderson, are you in immediate physical danger?" "No, nothing like that. But I think I need help." "What kind of help?" "I think I need to understand my legal options." The next week passed in a blur of legal consultations and difficult conversations. Patricia Sullivan explained New York's community property laws, which were less straightforward than Harold had suggested. While assets acquired during marriage are generally considered marital property, lottery winnings present unique circumstances, particularly when the winning ticket was purchased with personal allowance money rather than marital funds. More importantly, Patricia explained that Harold couldn't have me declared incompetent simply because he disagreed with my financial decisions. Guardianship required medical evidence of cognitive impairment, which I clearly didn't have. "Your husband seems to be using legal intimidation to pressure you into giving up control," Patricia told me during one of our meetings. "It's more common than you might think, especially when large sums of money are involved." Meanwhile, the lottery winnings had been deposited into my new account at Chase Manhattan, $13.7 million. More money than I'd ever imagined having. More money than I knew how to think about. But Harold's reaction to the deposit surprised me. I expected anger. I expected more threats about guardianship papers and asset protection. Instead, he became almost charming. "Margaret," he said over breakfast the morning after the deposit, "I think we got off on the wrong foot with all this legal talk." I looked up from my coffee. "We did. I was just trying to protect us. But maybe I was being too cautious." He reached across the table and took my hand. His fingers felt unfamiliar after a week of tension and legal meetings. "I think we should celebrate," he said. "Celebrate? You won the lottery, sweetheart. That's incredible. That's a miracle. I should have been celebrating with you from the beginning instead of worrying about all the legal complications." I stared at him. This was a version of Harold I hadn't seen in years. Warm, affectionate, interested in my feelings. "What did you have in mind?" I asked carefully. "Dinner at Le Bernardin. That French place in Manhattan you've always wanted to try. Make a real evening of it." Le Bernardin was one of the most expensive restaurants in New York. Harold had always dismissed it as pretentious and overpriced. But now, with $13.7 million in my bank account, apparently it was worth considering. "That sounds nice," I said. "I'll make a reservation for Friday night. We'll take a taxi into the city, have a proper celebration dinner." Harold was solicitous all week. He brought me coffee in bed, asked about my day, suggested we take a winter vacation somewhere warm. It felt like our early years of marriage, when he'd been attentive and romantic. But something felt wrong. This sudden shift from legal threats to romantic gestures was too dramatic, too calculated. It felt performative. On Friday afternoon, while Harold was getting dressed for our celebration dinner, I did something I'd never done in 47 years of marriage. I went through his things. In the bedroom dresser, underneath his undershirts, I found a folder full of legal documents. The guardianship papers Peterson had prepared. Financial forms for asset transfer. And something else. Something that made my blood run cold. A contract with a private investigator named Marcus Webb. The contract authorized Webb to investigate my gambling activities and potential lottery fraud. It included a detailed timeline of my ticket purchases at Chen's Market over the past year. It authorized Webb to interview Mrs. Chen, her employees, and other customers about my relationship with the store. Harold had hired a private investigator to build a fraud case against me. I sat on our bed, holding papers that proved my husband didn't just distrust my judgment. He was actively trying to prove I'd committed a crime. The folder also contained correspondence between Harold and our children. Emails discussing my deteriorating mental state and the need for family intervention to protect my lottery winnings. But the most damaging document was a psychiatric evaluation request. Harold had contacted Dr. Richard Steinberg, a neurologist at Brooklyn Methodist, requesting an evaluation of my cognitive capacity and decision-making ability. Harold was building a case that I was mentally incompetent to manage my own money. I heard the shower stop running in our bathroom. Harold would be getting dressed soon, ready for our celebration dinner at Le Bernardin. I put the documents back exactly as I'd found them and went to the living room to wait. When Harold emerged from the bedroom 20 minutes later, he looked handsome in his gray suit and blue tie. He'd even used cologne, something he hadn't done in years. "You look beautiful," he said, kissing my cheek. I was wearing my best dress, the black one I'd bought for Jennifer's wedding 3 years ago. I'd done my hair and put on lipstick, playing the role of the happy lottery winner celebrating with her devoted husband. "Ready for our big night out?" Harold asked. "Ready," I said. But I wasn't ready for celebration. I was ready for confrontation. We took a taxi into Manhattan, riding through the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel while Harold talked about our future plans. A winter vacation in Florida. Renovations to our apartment. College funds for our grandchildren. We could even buy a place in the suburbs, he said as Manhattan's skyline came into view. A house with a yard. Maybe in Westchester or New Jersey, near Jennifer and the boys. It all sounded wonderful. It all sounded like the dreams we'd shared during our early years of marriage. But now I knew it was manipulation. Harold was painting pictures of our shared future while simultaneously building a legal case to take control of my money. Le Bernardin was everything I'd imagined. Elegant, sophisticated, the kind of restaurant where waiters memorized your preferences and wine stewards spoke in reverent whispers about vintage and terroir. Harold ordered champagne. The most expensive bottle on the wine list. "To my brilliant wife," he said, raising his glass. "And to the incredible luck that's going to change our lives." I raised my glass but didn't drink. "Harold, can I ask you something? Tonight? Can't we just enjoy ourselves?" "Who is Marcus Webb?" Harold's champagne glass stopped halfway to his lips. "Who?" "Marcus Webb. The private investigator you hired to investigate my lottery activities." The elegant restaurant suddenly felt very quiet. Harold set down his champagne glass with exaggerated care. "Margaret, I think there's been a misunderstanding." "Is there a misunderstanding about Dr. Steinberg too? The neurologist you contacted about evaluating my cognitive capacity?" Harold's face went through several expressions: surprise, calculation, resignation. "You went through my things," he said finally. "You hired a private investigator to prove I committed fraud. I hired someone to protect us from potential accusations. By gathering evidence to support those accusations?" Harold looked around the restaurant, aware that other diners might be listening. "This isn't the place for this conversation." "This is exactly the place for this conversation. While you're spending my money on champagne and trying to convince me that you're celebrating my success. It is our money, Margaret. Legally, ethically, morally, it's our money. And if I'm declared mentally incompetent, it becomes your money." Harold leaned forward across the table. "No one is trying to have you declared incompetent. Then what was the psychiatric evaluation request for?" "Insurance. Protection. Making sure that if anyone challenges your mental state, we have documentation proving your competence." Even his lies were sophisticated now. Harold had always been a clever man, but I'd never seen him deploy that cleverness against me before. "I want to go home," I said. "Margaret, please. We haven't even ordered dinner." I said I want to go home. The taxi ride back to Brooklyn was silent. Harold stared out his window at the East River while I stared out mine at the city lights reflecting on black water. Back in our apartment, Harold poured himself a scotch and sat in his recliner while I changed out of my dress and into comfortable clothes. When I came back to the living room, he looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not angry, not calculating. Resigned, maybe. Or defeated. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now you tell me the truth." Harold took a long sip of his scotch. "What do you want to know?" "I want to know how long you've been planning this." "Planning what?" "Don't." I sat down across from him. "We've been married for 47 years. I know when you're lying." Harold was quiet for several minutes. Outside, Brooklyn continued its Friday night rhythm: sirens, car alarms, the distant sound of music from a neighboring apartment. "I started thinking about it the day after you won," he said finally. "Thinking about what?" "About what would happen to us. To our family. If you suddenly had access to that much money." "And what did you think would happen?" Harold stared into his scotch glass. "I thought you'd leave me." The words hung in the air between us like smoke. "Leave you?" "Margaret, be honest. Have we been happy? Really happy? In the last 10 years?" I considered the question. No, not really. So if you suddenly had $13 million, what would keep you here? I looked around our small apartment. The furniture we'd accumulated over decades. The photographs documenting our life together. The comfortable routines that had sustained us through middle age into our 70s. I never said I wanted to leave, Harold. You didn't have to say it. I could see it in your eyes. The day you won, when you looked at that ticket, you weren't seeing our shared future. You were seeing your freedom. He wasn't wrong. In those first moments after checking the winning numbers, I had felt something like freedom. Not freedom from Harold specifically, but freedom from financial worry, from small compromises, from making do with less than what I wanted. So you decided to control the money before I could use it to leave? I decided to protect our marriage. Our family. Our future together. By having me investigated for fraud. Harold finished his scotch and set the empty glass on the side table. By making sure you couldn't make a unilateral decision that would destroy everything we've built together. Harold, do you hear yourself? You're talking about marriage like it's a business partnership. At our age, with our history, what else is it? We're not passionate lovers anymore. We're not even particularly good friends. But we're family. We're committed to each other. I stared at him. That's the most depressing thing I've ever heard. It's realistic. It's sad. Harold leaned forward in his chair. Margaret, what do you want? Really want? The question caught me off guard. When was the last time anyone had asked me what I wanted? I want to be trusted, I said. I want to make my own decisions about my own life. I want to be treated like a competent adult who happened to get lucky, not like a problem that needs managing. And what about us? What about our marriage? I looked at Harold sitting in his recliner, still wearing his good suit from our disaster of a celebration dinner. This man I'd loved and lived with and raised children with for almost 50 years. I don't know, I said honestly. You don't know if you want to stay married? I don't know if we're actually married anymore, or if we're just two people who share an apartment and a history. Harold was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was different. Smaller. What would it take, he asked. What take? For you to stay. For us to make this work. I thought about his question. What would it take for our marriage to survive my lottery win? It would take you trusting me, I said. It would take you supporting my decisions instead of trying to control them. It would take you treating me like your partner instead of your ward. And the money? The money is mine, Harold. I won it. I get to decide how it's used. Even if your decisions affect me? Affect our children? My decisions will affect all of us. But they're still my decisions to make. We sat in our living room, surrounded by 47 years of shared life, trying to figure out whether our marriage could survive my good fortune. I'll cancel the private investigator, Harold said finally. And the psychiatric evaluation? And the psychiatric evaluation? And the guardianship papers? I'll tell Peterson we're not moving forward with any legal action. I studied his face, trying to read his sincerity. Why now? Why are you suddenly willing to back down? Harold rubbed his forehead, looking older than his 74 years. Because I realized something tonight. At dinner, when you asked about Marcus Webb. What did you realize? I realized that I was so afraid of losing you to the money that I was going to lose you to my attempt to control it. We talked until almost dawn. Not the easy conversation of our early years, but the hard conversation of two people trying to decide whether they still wanted to be married. Harold explained his fears about sudden wealth destroying our family. I explained my need for autonomy and respect. We both acknowledged that our marriage had been more habit than happiness for the past several years. But we also acknowledged 47 years of shared history. 3 children. 6 grandchildren. A life built together through decades of small joys and ordinary sorrows. I have a proposal, I said as the sky began to lighten outside our windows. What kind of proposal? Let's try counseling. Marriage counseling. Before we make any permanent decisions about our relationship or the money. Harold looked skeptical. At our age? Especially at our age. We've earned the right to be happy, Harold. Both of us. But we need help figuring out what that looks like now. And in the meantime? In the meantime, no more legal maneuvering. No more private investigators. No more attempting to control decisions that are mine to make. And no major financial decisions without discussion? I considered this. It seemed reasonable. Define major. Anything over $50,000 gets discussed first. Not vetoed, just discussed. Agreed. We shook hands across our coffee table like business partners sealing a deal. It wasn't romantic, but it felt honest. The next few months were the strangest of our 47-year marriage. We found a counselor, Dr. Amanda Price, a woman in her 60s who specialized in late-in-life marriage issues. We met with her every Thursday afternoon in her office overlooking Central Park. Those sessions were harder than I'd expected. We talked about Harold's feeling of uselessness as I took control of our finances. We talked about my resentment over decades of small diminishments and dismissed opinions. We talked about how sudden wealth had revealed fault lines in our marriage that had been developing for years. But we also talked about what we still valued in our relationship. Our shared sense of humor. Our pride in our children and grandchildren. Our comfort with each other's daily rhythms and routines. Dr. Price helped us understand that the lottery money hadn't created our marital problems, it had simply given us the resources to address them. Many couples your age feel trapped by financial limitations, she explained during one session. They can't afford to live separately, can't afford major life changes, can't afford to take risks. Suddenly, those limitations are gone. That's both liberating and terrifying. She was right. For the first time in decades, Harold and I had to actively choose to stay married. Not because we couldn't afford to separate, not because we were too old to start over, but because we wanted to be together. It took 6 months to reach a decision. We decided to stay married, but we also decided to change almost everything about how our marriage worked. I kept the lottery money in accounts under my name, but I consulted Harold on major expenditures. We renovated our apartment, something we'd talked about for years but could never afford. We established college funds for our grandchildren. We took that winter vacation to Florida that Harold had suggested during his charm offensive. But I also made my own decisions. I donated $500,000 to Brooklyn Methodist Hospital, where I'd worked for 30 years. I bought a small apartment in Manhattan, a place where I could go when I needed space and independence. I started taking art classes and yoga and literature courses at the new school. For the first time in decades, I felt like myself. Not Harold's wife or our children's mother, but Margaret. A person with her own interests and capabilities and dreams. Harold struggled with the changes initially. He'd been the decision-maker in our family for so long that my independence felt like rejection. But gradually, he began to appreciate having a wife who was engaged with the world beyond our apartment. "You're happier," he told me one evening as we sat on our renovated balcony overlooking Atlantic Avenue. "I am happier. It's good to see." We were different people than we'd been before the lottery. The money had given us permission to become who we actually were rather than who we thought we had to be. Our children had mixed reactions to our transformation. Jennifer was thrilled to see me more confident and engaged. Michael worried that I was being reckless with money that should be saved for emergencies. David, our youngest, seemed primarily interested in whether his inheritance would be affected by my new spending patterns. But we navigated those conversations too. With Dr. Price's help, we established clear boundaries about what financial information we would share with our children and when. We made wills and estate plans that ensured everyone's future security while preserving my autonomy over current spending. A year after winning the lottery, I was sitting in my Manhattan apartment on a Thursday afternoon, looking out at Washington Square Park and reading a novel for my literature class, when my phone rang. "Mrs. Henderson?" The voice was unfamiliar. "Yes? This is James Crawford from Channel 7 News. We're doing a follow-up story about your lottery win. How has the money changed your life?" I thought about the question. How had the money changed my life? "It made me braver," I said. "Braver?" "It gave me the courage to insist on being treated with respect. To make my own decisions. To become the person I always was but was afraid to be." After I hung up, I continued thinking about that conversation. The money had changed my life, but not in the ways I'd expected. I hadn't bought a mansion or a fancy car or taken exotic vacations around the world. Instead, I'd bought something more precious, the right to be myself. I thought about Harold, who was probably at home reading his newspaper and planning tomorrow's visit to our grandchildren in New Jersey. We'd found a way to stay married while allowing each other to grow and change. It wasn't the marriage we'd had for 47 years, but it was better suited to who we'd become. I thought about the scared woman who'd sat in our kitchen a year ago, clutching a winning lottery ticket while her husband accused her of fraud. That woman had felt powerless despite holding $13 million worth of luck in her hands. Now I understood that the real prize hadn't been the money. It had been learning to value myself enough to fight for my own dignity and autonomy. The phone rang again. This time it was Harold. "How was your literature class?" he asked. "Wonderful. We're reading Virginia Woolf. Any good?" She writes about women finding their own voices. Finding the courage to live on their own terms. Harold was quiet for a moment. "Sounds familiar." "It does, doesn't it? Are you coming home for dinner?" I looked out at Washington Square Park, where students and artists and dreamers were pursuing their own versions of happiness. "I'll be home by 6, I said. And I realized that I meant it. Not because I had to be home, not because I couldn't afford to stay in Manhattan, not because Harold demanded my presence, but because I wanted to be home. Because after 47 years of marriage and 1 year of rebuilding, Harold and I had created something worth choosing. The lottery ticket that caused so much turmoil had ultimately given us the greatest gift of all, the freedom to love each other by choice rather than obligation. That evening, as Harold and I sat down to dinner in our renovated apartment, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: gratitude for my life exactly as it was. "Good day?" Harold asked. "Very good day. Win any more lotteries?" I laughed. "I think one is enough." But I was wrong about that. I'd won more than one lottery. I'd won the courage to demand respect. I'd won the right to make my own decisions. I'd won a marriage based on mutual choice rather than financial necessity. And most importantly, I'd won the knowledge that at 73 years old, it was never too late to become who you were always meant to be. Now, as I share this story with you, I think about all the people, especially women my age, who find themselves in situations where family members try to control or minimize or take advantage of them. Maybe it's not lottery money. Maybe it's an inheritance, or savings, or social security benefits, or simply the right to make decisions about your own life. But the principle is the same. You deserve to be treated with respect. You deserve to have your competence assumed rather than questioned. You deserve to make your own choices about your own life, even, especially, when those choices affect other people. The money gave me options I never had before. But I learned that the most important option wasn't financial. It was the option to say no. The option to demand better treatment. The option to choose relationships based on mutual respect rather than fear or habit or financial dependence. I learned that it's never too late to set boundaries. It's never too late to insist on dignity. It's never too late to become the person you always were but were afraid to be. Today, Harold and I have been married for 48 years. We're different people than we were when I bought that winning lottery ticket, and our marriage is different too. Better, I think, because it's based on choice rather than circumstance. We still live in Brooklyn, though our apartment is much more comfortable now. I still take art classes and literature courses. Harold has started volunteering at a literacy program for adult learners. We travel more, we argue less, and we appreciate each other more. But the most important change is this: I trust myself now. I trust my judgment, my instincts, my right to make decisions about my own life. That self-trust is more valuable than any amount of money. So let me ask you this: have you ever found yourself in a situation where family members questioned your competence, tried to control your finances, or suggested that your good fortune was somehow suspicious or undeserved? Have you ever felt like you had to defend your right to make decisions about your own life? If any part of my story feels familiar, I want you to know that you're not alone. And I want you to know that it's never too late to demand better. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. Your support helps me continue sharing these stories, and they might reach someone who needs to hear them. Remember, you deserve respect. You deserve autonomy. You deserve to be trusted with your own life. Thank you for listening.